to Pottsgrove Mayfair. I am the Colonial Brewer, and I am brewing beer in the manner that it was done in the 18th century. Beer is a very important thing to the 18th century household, and most beer was brewed at home, but taverns and large houses like Pottsgrove will have journeyman brewers come and visit their homes to brew large batches of beer. Why do we brew beer? Well, in short, the water's not very good. The water of the Schuylkill River down here, it's got all the runoff from local farms. The closer you get to the cities, the more runoff you get from the cities, plus the mines and the slaughterhouses are going to pollute the water. You don't want to drink the water. You can get dysentery, you can get cholera, all sorts and manners of diseases will come to you if you drink the water. Come up here. Colonial beer is made from four main ingredients. We have water. All things start with water. We're boiling the water. The reason why beer is healthy for you is not because it has alcohol in it, it's because we boil the water. We're going to use malt. Malt is barley that's been allowed to germinate and then roasted. If you taste it, can't taste it in our virtual Mayfair, but if you taste it, it tastes like Malt-O-Meal. It's very sweet and very enjoyable. This is hops. As a colonial brewer, I'm going to use any kind of flour I can get my hands on to give my beer bitterness and aroma. Today, we're brewing a spruce beer. So one of the things I'm going to add to my beer is spruce tips. In 1635, Charles Cartier was exploring the Northeast Territory for France. And up in the Hudson Valley, his men were getting scurvy in the wintertime. He learned from the Hurons that if you brew beer out of spruce, you don't get scurvy. As a matter of fact, it's strong enough that it's actually good enough that it cures bits of the scurvy. Men weren't totally cured, but it did help. So we're going to brew spruce beer, very, very important favorite. And something that was so important that George Washington ordered that every man in the Colonial Army be issued a quart of good spruce beer every day. You could take water out of the Schuylkill River to drink. The problem with that is that all the runoff from all of the mines and the cities and the farms and the slaughterhouses runs down into the Schuylkill River. So you're going to get dysentery, cholera, all sorts of terrible, terrible diseases. We brew beer because beer is clean. We take our water, the first thing we're going to do with our water is boil it. When we boil the water, we're killing all the microbes and all the things that are in it. In the 30s, John Cartier was exploring the Hudson Bay for the French, and his men were getting scurvy in the wintertime. He learned from the Hurons that if you brew beer out of spruce, it's protective and even curative of scurvy. So today we're going to brew spruce beer. I have some blue spruce tips, which I've collected from my yard. And as we bring the water to boil, we're going to put these blue spruce tips into the water. As the water boils, ascorbic acid is going to be released from these spruce tips. And that is going to give the beer a nice, nutty, citrusy flavor, but it's also going to make it a curative agent for scurvy because ascorbic acid is vitamin C. The bulk of our beer is made out of barley. What barley is, I mean, this is malted barley. Malted barley is when I let the barley germinate and then I roast it. The germination process converts all the starches and sugars into things that will ferment and allow our beer to have alcohol. It's not the alcohol that keeps our beer clean, it's the boiling of the water, but it adds a little something to the troops while they're out in the field. Barley. We could use corn, we could use rice. Matter of fact, if you drink a modern beer, it's got corn and rice in it. But 18th century beer, we're making mostly out of barley, and it's malted barley. What the malting process is we take the grain and we allow it to germinate. And then as soon as it's germinated, we roast it. And all the enzymes that convert the sugars and starches in the barley into things that will ferment happen in that germination process. So by capturing that malted, that barley at the point where it's germinated, we're able to take this grain, this very starchy substance, and turn it into something that will ferment and create alcohol. The next bit we put in our beer is we put hops. Hops are flowers, and they're actually related to marijuana flowers. But hops are going to give us a bittering to our beer. It's also going to add a bit that allows it to be stable when we put it in the bottle. So our beer won't go bad in a couple of days. It'll last for months in the barrel.
Rolling.
Okay. You learn to brew from primary sources. I have here Every Man His Own Brewer, 18th century compendium on
Cut
English.
in.
We learn brewing from various primary sources, if you will. I have here Every Man His Own Brewer, an English compendium on English brewing technique. Books like this would have been available to folks like John Potts and people who had money. There's also another book that just came out, The New Age of Brewing. I say just came out, 1754, and it tells us about the more advanced techniques of the 18th century.
And action. And action.
You know, you don't learn to be a colonial brewer all by yourself. You start with some primary sources. And so I have here Every Man His Own Brewer. You know, this book here was the compendium of how to brew in the modern method. When I say the modern method, of course, we're talking 1750s. And for those of you who are a bit more modern, I have 1770s here, the new art of brewing. We talk about things like decoction, these newfangled tools that Dr. Franklin is playing with, thermometers and hydrometers. Boy, I wish I had more money. I'd buy some of those tools because they would make my job a whole lot easier. Hi. You know, the problem with brewing beer is it takes hours and hours and hours. So it's always good to have a good book, or even better. You know what goes really well with brewing beer? Beer. So I'm gonna open up some of our last batch that we brewed, and I'll share it with my cameraman.
Oh. Oh boy.
Enjoy. In the 18th century, we don't have fancy tools like thermometers. They have them, but they're very, very expensive and very fragile. So as a journeyman brewer, I learned to judge things like temperature and quantity by sight and feel. So if you'll look here, you'll see that my water is beginning to foam. You can see the vapors working across the top of it, like a cloud. That tells me that my water is what we call scalding. If I put my hand in there, I'll get blisters. Don't do that one. But I'm learning to judge it. So you see how the water kind of dances over, you can see the vapors. When I can look in there and see my reflection, it's ready to what I call strike, which is add the malt.
Go.
I have all sorts of contrivances here to help me manage the fire. In your house, when you brew or you cook, you have a stove. You can turn the fire up and down. I have none of that here. The fire is as hot as it is. So I have a number of different tools. I have these S-hooks that hang my kettle above the fire, and I can add S-hooks or take S-hooks away. Or I can use this Dremel hook, which is kind of a fancy S-hook and allows me to make it longer or shorter, getting my pot closer or farther from the fire. And last but not least, I have my trusty blowpipe poker. Sometimes you just need to move things around in the fire, and if it gets cold, like a blacksmith, I'll add some heat to it.
1, 3, 4. Gorgeous.
We need lots of heat when we're brewing. We're going to boil, in this case, 5 gallons, but typically 50 gallons of water. It takes a lot of fire in order to do that. And when I put the malt in there, the heat that it takes to bring it to boil is going to go up because I have all those dissolved sugars. So my fire has to be very hot. This isn't like brewing, it's not like hearth cooking in the kitchen where I'm going to work over hot coals. I need a roaring fire. Now that our spruce has added its essence to the water, I'm going to take it out. And I have this unique little spatula here. It's got holes in the bottom so I can skim. All right,
And-
our water's reached its what we call strike temperature, about 170 degrees centigrade, or 100 or Fahrenheit rather. We're going to now mix in the malt, and you can begin to smell. It smells like oatmeal. I put cheesecloth around my brew barrel, which is a technique. There are two ways to lauter the beer. One is to have a barrel with a false bottom in it. The other is to have this bag. And what will happen is when we're done mashing, mixing our malt with our water, we'll lift that cheesecloth up and separate the sugary wort from the grain.
And cut.
So now we get to a very important stage. We're going to wait. It's going to take our malt about an hour to extract all the sugars from the grains here. During that time, we'll do a couple of things to the mash, but mostly we wait. Measuring time is a really important part of brewing, but if you were to have a pocket watch like this would cost me in 1750 upwards of 18 pounds, or 2 years of my annual salary. So most of the time, what we're going to do when we judge the time is we're going to look up. We're going to see the sun, and I'm going to measure how far through the sky it moves. And I'm going to be able to tell when it moves from there to there. I've gone from noon to 1 o'clock. Today we have highly engineered, almost genetically modified grains. So making your wort out of malt is easy. But in the 18th century, they didn't have quite as good an enzyme component. So we do a German technique here. It's called decoction. Decoction literally means I'm going to take a bit. So I'm going to reach down in here, I'm going to stir up my mash, and I'm going to take a bit of it out and put it in a separate bucket. Then I'm going to put this bucket over the fire and I'm going to heat it up. This is going to break down some sugars. It's also going to add heat back into my wort, which allows it to stay warmer and do a better job at conversion. So we'll put this over the fire, we'll bring it to a quick boil, and we'll stir it back in. That's decoction. As a journeyman brewer, I'm strictly in the middle class. I'm not your common day laborer. I'm not a gentleman, but I'm not a common day laborer. So you're going to see that I try to dress well for every occasion. But it's gotten a bit hot here. So I'm going to remove my overcoat, but never my waistcoat, never my neck scarf, and I will always keep my hat covered. So I may change my hat for something a little less formal.
But the hat looks so good on you.
You like it?
Yeah.
How about this? How about I give it to you?
Can I keep it?
Well, you didn't think you were going to get paid in cash, did you?
Oh.
Okay, as you can see, our decoction's gotten to that scalding temperature. We don't want to boil it because that adds too much color to our beer. But what we're going to do now is we're going to put it back in the mash. Stir it in real good. Now we're going to do an advanced brewing technique, second decoction. So now we've allowed our mash to sit, and it's actually gotten cool. So we want to now do what's called lautering. We're going to take the malt mash and we're going to separate it from the grain husk. And by the way, this process also purifies the water because it filters everything through that grain. Now, there are two ways to do that. One, and probably the most common in the 18th century, would have been to have a false bottom barrel. I didn't bring my false bottom barrel out today. So what we're going to do instead is we're going to use a muslin bag. Muslin was very common in the 18th century. Lots of women made clothes out of it. We're going to take a very loose weave bag, hook it up on our S hooks and lift it out of the mash. And as we lift it out of the mash, all that fluid is going to drain out of it and into our boil bucket. So I have here hops, and depending on how long the hops are in your beer, you get bitterness or aroma. We're just about ready to boil, so we're going to put our bittering hops in now. I'm going to carefully measure out my bittering hops, 18th century style. That ought to do it. Okay, well, we've moved the beer into the 21st century. We have it now in a sealed glass container, and you'll notice that the yeast is taken on and it's emitting gas, which tells us that the yeast are converting the malt sugars to alcohol and carbon dioxide. In about 2 weeks, we'll have beer. You may have seen beer bottled in glass bottles or even kegs. Of course, in the 18th century, we didn't have glass. We had glass bottles, but they were expensive. You'll see most of our beer is brewed. It's set in ceramic bottles, sealed with a cork. Tastes really good, though.
I am the director. I have the chair. I like cinematics. Because, I don't know, I feel like being artsy.